Seminar of the second phase of the International PhD in Progress Weekly Seminar Series organised by the Global South Network. Thank you to the organiser, Dr. Nauman Rayat, lecturer in law at Leicester Law School. He is also the convener and creator of the network. My name is Tom Frost. I am senior lecturer at Kent Law School. I will be chairing the session today. I'm joined by Dr. Tamaraudoubra Egbe, lecturer in law at Leicester Law School. Dr. Egbe, prior to his appointment at Leicester, he was a lecturer at the Nottingham Law School, having obtained his academic and professional qualifications from academic institutions in both Nigeria and the United Kingdom. Tam is also a qualified barrister and solicitor, non-practicing of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Today's speaker is Emilia Oris Onyiri, who's a PhD candidate at the School of Law, University of Nottingham. Emilia's research interests lie in international trade, finance and economic law. Emilia is a qualified barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, where she practiced advocacy in civil, corporate, financial and commercial law disputes before commencing her PhD studies. Emilia is also a certified mediator and arbitrator, a member of the Nigerian Bar Association and a member of the Nigerian Institute of Chartered Arbitrators. She will be presenting her project titled The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, Navigating the Barriers to Trade Liberalization and Economic Integration. So if I can just remind, and I will do the same, but if I can just remind everyone to mute their mics if you're not talking to avoid any reverberation and echoing. Emilia, you have 25 minutes for the presentation, which will be followed by 5 minutes for comments and questions from the discussant and your peer commentator, and then 15 minutes of questions and answers. So if it's okay with you, I'll give you maybe a 2-minute warning before it's up. Okay, yeah. Lovely. Emilia, please, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom Frost. Can I have the slides up for...
There you go. Can you see?
No. Not yet.
No.
Now.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
great.
Now I can. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is, as earlier introduced, Emilia Oris Onyiri, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Nottingham. My research topic is the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, Navigating the Barriers to Trade Liberalization and Economic Integration. I just need to go to, yeah. Right, so I have a research outline, a presentation outline here for today's presentation. I'll start with an introduction to ECOWAS and some key concepts. Thereafter, I'll delve into the significance of the research. And after that, I'll identify some of the gaps in the current literature and the contribution of this research to new knowledge. I'll give the methodologies that have been adopted in this research. After that, I'll explore some key concepts, especially with respect to regional integration and Pan-Africanism. Thereafter, I'll identify some of the trade barriers in ECOWAS. And after that, I'll be exploring what I have coined from this research as the tripartite colonial experience. I'll give a brief introduction to the African Continental Free Trade Area, as well as its impact on trade integration in ECOWAS, and I'll give a conclusion to the presentation. So by way of introduction, it's important to note that this research is Afrocentric in nature because it's underpinned by certain key concepts, especially with respect to regional integration in Africa and Pan-Africanism. Just by way of a brief introduction, ECOWAS, which is the focal point of the research, is the predominant regional trade and economic community in West Africa, and it was founded in 1975 via the Treaty establishing the Economic Community of West African States 1975. It comprises of 15 member states, which are the Republic of Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Togo. Amongst other reasons, ECOWAS was founded for the member states to cooperate, pool their resources together in order to attain deeper trade and economic integration amongst the member states within the community. Now, with respect to the significance of the research, it's important to highlight that there are 8 regional economic communities in Africa as recognized by the World Trade Organization. And of these, ECOWAS happens to be the oldest regional economic community, but also one of the least advanced, especially in the area of trade and trade integration. And so this research will be identifying some of the tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade integration in ECOWAS and how these barriers can be eliminated or addressed. It also helps to ascertain the feasibility of advancing trade liberalization and integration in ECOWAS, especially with growing political and economic instability in some ECOWAS member states, which at the moment are Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. It's also important, the research is also important because it would help to explore and give an in-depth understanding of what the unique compositional intricacies in ECOWAS are, which from the research is coined to be the tripartite colonial experience. And this happens to be one of the factors that exacerbates the trade barriers in ECOWAS. And finally, the research will help to set a model for trade integration and trade liberalization for other regional economic communities in Africa. Now, with respect to the gaps in the current literature, the current scholarship or literature in this area have compared the trade integration scheme and the trade integration model of ECOWAS with the trade integration scheme of the European Union. I'm of a very different opinion because I believe that the European Union and ECOWAS have very different compositional intricacies, which make such a comparison quite unrealistic and not feasible. Another gap in the current literature is the focus of the economic perspectives to advancing trade liberalization and integration in ECOWAS without having recourse to the legal perspectives to trade integration and trade liberalization. And so the contribution to new knowledge that this research will be given is that it'll be providing a legal perspective to addressing the trade barriers which will be identified in the research in ECOWAS. And it'll be comparatively analyzing the trade integration scheme of ECOWAS with 2 sister African economic communities, which are the East African Community, the EAC, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC, which at the moment are considered to be the most advanced and most integrated regional economic communities in Africa. So with respect to the methodology, this research will employ 3 methodologies. And these are a doctrinal legal analysis, because the research will be given some definitions and historical framework or historical foundation to certain concepts such as regional integration, integration theories in general, and then tracing that down to regional integration in Africa. I'll also be employing an interdisciplinary or socio-legal analysis, and that's because regional integration in itself is underpinned by various spheres, especially within academia. And so I'll be borrowing a lot from economics, sociology, politics, in order to build up my legal analysis or legal perspectives to the research. And finally, the research should be adopting a comparative analysis where the legal and regulatory framework which govern trade in ECOWAS and the legal and regulatory framework which govern trade in the East African community and the Southern African community, development community, will be comparatively analyzed. Sorry. So I'll be giving just a very brief definition of some key concepts which underpin the research. The very first being regional integration. Now, regional integration, in very simple terms, is a process whereby countries, either within the same or outside geographical region, come together to harmonize their common rules, policies, and institutions. And regional integration is done with the aim of achieving a common economic or, of recent, political fit or desire by the member states. Moving on to Pan-Africanism, Pan-Africanism is an ideological force or a theoretical foundation which underpins the desire of Africans, and this includes Africans in the diaspora and Africans on the African continent, to come together and champion the cause of oneness, development, and progress for Africans. And it's mainly geared towards realizing the goal of developing the African continent and developing the African people, especially economically. Now, ECOWAS is an offshoot of these two concepts of regional integration and Pan-Africanism, as it captures what the concepts represent, what both concepts represent, rather. Here we have the stages of regional integration, which is done via regional regional trade agreements. So we can coin that to be either the stages of regional trade agreements or the stages of regional integration. The very first stage is a free trade area or a preferential trade area, which is underpinned by or characterized by the abolition of tariffs and quantitative restrictions amongst the member states. However, the member states are free to levy their own tariffs on non-member states. The next stage of regional integration is a customs union, and a customs union is characterized by the abolition of tariffs and quantitative restrictions amongst member states. And it's also characterized by an adoption of a common external tariff, which will be applied to non-member states. The next stage of regional integration is a common market. Now, a common market is a lot more advanced than the free trade area and the customs union, in the sense that it's characterized by the removal of all barriers to trade. And this includes the barriers to the free movement of persons, the free movement of goods, the free movement of services, the free movement of labor and capital, and enabling the rights of residents and the rights of establishment for member states. Thereafter, we have the economic union. An economic union is characterized by the harmonization of fiscal and economic policies of the member states. And finally, we have the political union or full integration, which is characterized by an adoption of governmental policies amongst the member states. And there is also a very significant reduction in the independence or sovereignty of the member states to a common governmental body. So having identified, having delved into some of the stages of regional integration, it's important to identify some of the barriers to trade in ECOWAS. Now, these barriers have been categorized into two. We have the tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers. Under the tariff barriers, we have the export tariffs, the import tariffs, as well as the transit tariffs. And under the non-tariff barriers, we have quota restrictions, technical and administrative restrictions, customs regulations, sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, as well as certifications. So these are the barriers that will be covered in the research. Now I'll go into the legal and regulatory framework which govern trade in ECOWAS. The principal legal framework for trade in ECOWAS is the ECOWAS Revised Treaty of 1993, formerly the ECOWAS Treaty of 1975. And now this treaty has created or established complementary trade provisions which have been identified to be the ECOWAS Common External Tariff, the ECOWAS Customs Code, the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme, the ECOWAS Common Investment Code and Policy, the ECOWAS Regional Competition Policy Framework, the West African Common Industrial Policy, the ECOWAS Common Agricultural Policy, the Services Policy Review, and of recent, the African Continental Free Trade Area of 2019, which I'll be delving into further as the presentation progresses. Now, one of the key concepts which underpin a trade barrier to trade integration and liberalization in ECOWAS is what I have coined as the tripartite colonial experience, which is characterized by the non-implementation of ECOWAS law. So the member states in ECOWAS have been divided or categorized into three, dependent on their colonial experiences. So we have the Anglophone or the English-speaking member states colonized by Britain. And under these member states, we have the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. And under the Francophone member states, which are the French-speaking member states colonized by France, we have the Republic of Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. And under the Lusophone member states, which are also the Portuguese-speaking member states colonized by Portugal, we have Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. Now, one very interesting thing about the tripartite colonial experience is that these countries have very distinct legal systems, which are closely associated with their colonial experiences, and the implementation or the non-implementation of ECOWAS law is very closely related to their legal system and their perspectives towards regional integration as a result of their colonial experience. As a result of, because of time, I won't be able to delve further into the tripartite colonial experience, but I'm happy to take further questions on this at the end of the presentation. So moving on, I have an overview, just a very brief overview of the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community. So the East African Community, also known as the EAC, was founded in the year 2000 via the Treaty for the Establishment of the East African Community of 1999. It comprises of 7 partner states, which are the Republics of Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. On the other hand, the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, was founded in 1992 via the Southern African Development Community Treaty of 1992. It comprises of 16 member states, which are Angola, Botswana, Comoros, the Republic of the Congo, Eswatini, Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, United Republic of Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So the comparative analysis, which will be conducted in this research will be a comparison between the legal and regulatory framework governing trade in ECOWAS, as well as the legal and regulatory framework which governs trade in the East African community and the Southern African community. And the purpose of this comparison is to see how the trade integration scheme in ECOWAS can be modeled after the trade integration scheme in the East African community and the Southern African community, giving recourse to their legal and regulatory framework. And having identified the legal and regulatory framework which govern trade in ECOWAS, I'll just briefly run through the legal and regulatory framework which govern trade in the East African community and in the Southern African Development Community. So under the East African community, we have the principal regulatory framework or legal framework, which is the East African Treaty of 1999, which has established complementary trade provisions such as the East African Community Customs Union Protocol, the East African Community Common External Tariff, the East African Community Rules of Origin, the Customs Management Act of 2004, the East African Community Single Customs Territory, the East African Community Common Market Protocol, the East African Community Elimination of Non-Tariff Barriers to Trade of 2017, the Trade and Investment Framework Agreements, and the East African Competition Policy and Law. And under the Southern African Development Community, we have the key trade provision, which is the Southern African Development Community Treaty of 1992, as well as the Southern African Community Trade Protocol of 1996, which was amended in 2010. So moving on, I'll be introducing a very new free trade area because it was established in 2019, and that's the African Continental Free Trade Area of 2019. It was established via the African Continental Free Trade Agreement of 2019. And presently, it's the largest free trade area in the world by membership, as it comprises of the 54 member states, which are all African countries, with the exception of Eritrea. It was established with the aim of abolishing the barriers to trade in Africa by enabling the free movement of goods across the continent. And it's also important to highlight that this is one of the first steps toward an integrated Africa. So abolishing the barriers to the free movement of goods, and thereafter abolishing the barriers to the free movement of people, labor, capital, and resources, other resources. So it's important to highlight that the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area is highly dependent on the success of the 8 regional economic communities in Africa, of which ECOWAS, which is the focal point of this research, happens to be one of. Now, this means that if the 8 regional communities in Africa are able to eliminate the barriers to the free movement of goods within their regions, it'll be very easy and very feasible to have an integrated Africa where all the barriers to the free movement of goods across Africa can be eliminated. Now, one of the questions that arises from the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, especially with respect to its relationship with the pre-existing economic or trading blocks, is whether it's an intended federalism or an intended confederalism. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area is an intended federalism, and it's not established to abolish or eliminate the pre-existing regional economic communities in Africa, but it's intended to help harmonize and further integrate not just trade, but establish or create an integrated Africa where the barriers to the free movement of goods, the barriers to the free movement of people, labor, capital, in Africa will be eliminated. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I didn't even have to give you a time warning, so thank you. That was a really fascinating presentation. I'd like to invite now Dr. Tam Egbe to make comments for up to 5 minutes, and then Emilia, you'll have an opportunity to respond. If people want to put questions in the chat, feel free to, and I will read them out. So please, Dr. Egbe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. And also thank you, Emilia, for your presentation. It was a beautiful presentation, I must say. You do address a lot of novel issues regarding trade liberalization and integration in Africa. Your consideration of the legal approach is quite a novel one, given the gap in the literature. So I must say, I'm well done. I just have a few comments regarding the analysis, particularly in terms of your comparative discussion of ECOWAS, East African Community, and of course the SADC. I'm sure you must have even noticed in your research the distinctions amongst these different regional blocks, particularly in terms of their composition. For instance, some are very French dominated, some have more English leanings, English colonial influences. So that will mean that their legal systems are also different, which of course you acknowledged in your presentation as well. I did see that, but I'd like to have heard how you dealt with this sort of differences and what challenges you think this could bring for regional integration, particularly when it comes to ECOWAS, which seems to have all three present in terms of different colonial influences as well. Maybe that's a hindrance to why we're having issues of trade liberalization in Africa. There was also, again, in their composition as well. Remember, you did mention that EAC had 7 members, and you, of course, ECOWAS had 15, and SADC had 16 as well. So I also will be interested to see how you dealt with that as well, in terms of whether EAC will be a perfect comparison for ECOWAS, or what ECOWAS can learn from them, particularly because it's such a small sample size as well. So maybe because such a small sample size, that's why it becomes easier for them to have better solutions to trade liberalization. And something else I did mention is what I loved your methodology as well. That was really good. You had 3 different methodologies. You did speak on the doctrinal bits and also talked about the comparative bit, but I didn't hear a lot about the interdisciplinary bit, because you did mention how you were going to draw influences from economics and different disciplines as well to inform your research. So that was something I didn't hear. Was that deliberate because of the time, or what was your reason for not touching on that part of your research? There was also some scope for you to speak on the rationale behind adopting 3 methodological approaches, particularly because for a PhD thesis, you rarely ever see that type of approaches. Usually you just stick with one because you don't want to confuse yourself too much, but then you have to do 3 methodological approaches there. So I really would want to see how you sort of are going to deal with all 3, and whether you have the time as well to do all 3, because it takes a lot of work to deal with all 3 for 4 years as well. So I wondered how you're going to deal with this sort of constraint, particularly if you're funded as well. What are your plans to ensure that all 3 methodologies are reflected in your analysis? And I don't know what stage you are with your research, but it would have been lovely to have had your conclusions as to the comparative analysis you undertook regarding the regulatory framework. I mean, you did bring out all of the regulatory frameworks there, but I was hoping to hear a running thread amongst all three, or maybe some distinction in terms of the type of regulatory approaches that these colonies have adopted, or what they can learn from each other in terms of their approach to regional integration, trade liberalization and regional integration in Africa. I think this is where I'll stop for my comments on the paper, but well done overall. It was a lovely paper.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emilia, if you would like to respond.
Yes, I'll be happy to respond. Thank you very much, Dr. Egbe, for your contributions and the questions. So I'll just address, I have about 5 questions here. Yes, so I'll just address them individually. So for the first question with how I intend to deal with the colonial experiences in the 3 regional economic communities, given that, you know, like you rightly said, some are more Anglophone, like SADC, and others like the other like ECOWAS is comprises of both Anglophone and Francophone member states. So with respect to that, so far in my research, I have identified that, or I've realized that with a similar colonial experience, regional integration, especially in Africa, is a lot easier because this means that the countries will have similar legal systems and similar approach or perspectives to regional integration, which SADC and the EAC have been identified to have. With in comparison to ECOWAS, the distinct legal systems and the very different colonial experiences are have been very instrumental so far to the slow pace of regional integration, because the countries have very different approaches and very different perspectives to regional integration in general, and then to trade integration, to be very specific. And so far in my research, initially when I started the research, I was of the opinion that the English-speaking member states were more were more close-minded to regional integration, because any form of integration would require some, you know, toning down on sovereignty or independence and having to submit to a common or a central body in order for the desire of that regional community to be achieved. But now, in more recent times, my perspective on that has changed, as I'm now of the opinion that the Francophone speaking states, or the French speaking member states, are not as open as the English speaking member states to regional integration. And that's because there have been questions of whether these countries are even independent enough to get into a regional trade agreement as ECOWAS, such as ECOWAS. And this is characterized by the growing political and economic unrest that is seen in these member states, especially in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, where they are trying their best to be independent in the true sense of it, and see whether post-independence they're willing to go further in building trade integration with other member states, because at the moment those countries are not considered to even be integrated themselves, and countries need some level of integration and independence to be able to ratify international treaties such as ECOWAS. So I don't know if that addresses the first question sufficiently. And then the second question with respect to the EAC being better integrated because of its size and colonial composition. I mean, I agree with that perspective, because the intricacies, the compositional intricacies in the EAC are a lot less than the compositional intricacies in ECOWAS. However, that doesn't make the trade integration process of the EAC any smoother, because these countries there's still some unwillingness, especially with respect to political leadership. There is some political unwillingness of the countries in the EAC to, further advance their trade integration schemes. So some of the challenges that are inherent in the trade liberalization and integration scheme and desire of ECOWAS are still present in the EAC, but on a much smaller scale. And then with respect to my socio-legal methodology, I've adopted the socio-legal methodology as part of my methodology for this research, because regional integration originally and historically speaking has never been done from a legal perspective. It's always been underpinned by an economic desire for countries to pull their resources together and advance economic growth and development in the member states, which are party to an economic regional agreement, as well as a political desire for these countries to foster international relations and broker peace amongst each other. So a lot of the literature that I'll be using in my analysis will be from literature from other disciplines such as economics, sociology, and politics, because these are the areas that's founded, or these are the areas where regional integration was built on. And that's because the legal aspect of regional integration is very, very underdeveloped. So that's why I have adopted a social-legal methodology, because it'll be a combination of, the economic perspectives to regional integration, economic theories to integration in general, as well as political and social theories to integration. So these are what the research will need to be able to build on legal theories, which will be novel, especially because of the area. And with respect to why I have adopted three methodological approaches instead of one, I think that this research will not be effectively executed if I stick to just one methodology. If I stick to the doctrinal legal analysis, it means that I'll just be giving definition to theories and history to regional integration, it won't cut across what I intend to achieve with the research. I've already explained why I have adopted a socio-legal methodology, so I won't be delving into that any further. And then with respect to a comparative analysis, this is important because ECOWAS has been subject to a lot of criticisms, academic criticisms, because of the slow pace of its integration, especially in the area of trade. And now, when you subject a regional community to such criticism, you have to sort of establish the basis for such criticism. So if the trade integration scheme in ECOWAS is slow, what is it being compared to, in comparison to what? And like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the comparison has been done to the European Union, understandably so, because the European Union is the most advanced and the most integrated regional community in the world. But because ECOWAS and the European Union are so far-fetched, I don't think there is any basis for such a comparative analysis. And that's why I've brought it down to similar regional communities within Africa to see whether indeed ECOWAS, the trade integration scheme of ECOWAS is slow-paced, or whether it's in tandem with the EAC and SADC, which are the most advanced in Africa. And finally, the last question with respect to my conclusions on my comparative analysis. I think it's still very early on to draw conclusions, but so far where I've gotten to in my research, I don't think the EAC, I'm not of the opinion that the EAC and SADC are in a place or in a position to be model regional economic communities for ECOWAS, and that's because they are not even as advanced, especially in the area of trade, as they are presented to be. But with respect, in comparison to ECOWAS, they are just slightly more advanced. So I think that all 8, well, for the purposes of the research, the 3 regional communities that have been chosen still need a lot of development with respect to their trade integration model. And so the recommendation that I'll be giving at the end of my thesis is a model for regional economic integration in Africa, especially for trade integration and trade liberalization, as well as advocating for ECOWAS to model the trade integration and trade liberalization scheme of the EAC and of SADC, because they're just as underdeveloped as ECOWAS. Thank you.
Tom, you are muted. You are muted.
Oh, yes. Thank you,
Sorry,
Emilia.
both on.
You're welcome, Dr.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. We can now turn directly to our peer commentator, who is Cemre Kadioglu, a PhD candidate at the Leicester Law School, whose research broadly focuses on online dispute resolution. So Cemre, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation as well. So I really want to start this comment with the caveat that I'm not working in anything related to international trade. So if I'm not making any sense, please keep that in mind as well. I think it's really exciting to hear about your project because it is really novel and you're looking into under-researched areas. And I really loved your enthusiasm about it. And I think you brought a lot of novel issues as well. What is, I think, scary to me, it's too ambitious for a PhD project, because I think the scope that you were mentioning, I think you could get a lot of projects out of it, in my opinion. So it was not clear to me what the main focus should be, or how you're tackling these issues, because I was thinking all the time, would it be better to just focus on tariff barriers rather than non-tariff barriers, or vice versa, pick just one issue? Or would it be better to just pick a country and how it's dealing with its integration or its application of these barriers? Or would it be better to focus on to kind of narrowing down the scope of comparative analysis to a certain country, to a certain issue, to a certain product or service that is critical to West African or Africa in general, that could that's so critical to export or import that product, that would lead a whole community to have a common goal, only just a small portion of it. Because I think the gem of your perspective was this different colonial experiences. So I was wondering if it is what do you think about it? Would it be possible to focus on 2 countries from Anglophone colonial experience versus Francophone, for instance, experience, and how they are tackling with this regional trade agreement process? Because you said that you found that close-mindedness was an issue for Anglophone Anglophone background countries, and I think this is related to policy, but how this experience relate to their legal choices. I was curious about that, because I think in your abstract as well and in your presentation, you emphasized that this is the portion that is under research. Political and economic aspects are researched, and you're drawing from that. But what are the legal implications of this different experiences? For instance, would you consider an FET clause and how it is tackled with this different domestic experiences, or an MFN clause, or public security or health? So what I'm trying to say is that, would it be possible to narrow it down to a certain country or a certain tariff or a certain legal phenomenon? Would it be easier to tackle within a PhD project and then deal with all the other comparisons in different issues? Because I see different African trade agreements, and also you also addressed federalism or confederalism in AFCFTA. So those are all big issues, and would be too broad to tackle. That was I was kind of scared about that. And also, so you also said that you're gonna draw different literature from other disciplines like economics, regional integration theories, and it's does it relate to trade making? If it's so, again, going back to what aspect of trade making would be your main focus? And the other issue would be if you're not dealing with EU integration, maybe it could be another project to compare US MCA, for instance, and its integration with EU, and your model that you're going to develop and how it integrates with the rest of the world, with the EU, for instance. So I was just these are the comments, but my main question would be what is the actual scope and what is the actual research question? Thank you.
Okay. Emilia, if you want to take that for a couple of minutes, because we've got a couple more questions of people wanting to ask of you. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Cemre, for your questions. So the scope of my research is on ECOWAS. That's the focal point. So ECOWAS is one of the regional economic communities in Africa. Now, narrowing down that scope, I'm looking to identify how the barriers to trade in ECOWAS can be addressed, essentially. Now, there are various ways in which barriers to trade can be addressed. So the perspective I'm choosing to follow is the legal perspective. So addressing the barriers to trade by looking at the legal provisions or the legal framework which are established, have been enacted rather, to address the free movement of goods. Now, I'm unable to select just one product or one good across Africa because the different African countries produce very different products. And so one African country will be able to produce one product, and then another African country, or West African country rather, we may be able to produce another product. So the aim is to see how there can be a free movement or exchange of these goods within the region, within the community, without having recourse to the barriers to trade which impede the free movement of these goods. And so in looking at the legal perspective to addressing the trade barriers in ECOWAS, it's important to look at the implementation or the non-implementation of the ECOWAS Treaty and the complementary trade provisions in ECOWAS. And that's where this tripartite colonial experience comes in, that implementation is a huge issue it's one of the barriers to, the trade, the free movement of trade. And that's because the countries in West Africa or the countries in ECOWAS have very distinct legal systems, which is understandable because of their different colonial experiences. And so we want a situation whereby we would have just one mode of implementing these trade provisions that would enable the free movement of goods. But because these countries have very distinct legal provisions or legal systems and have very distinct approaches to regional integration as a whole, and then breaking it down to trade integration, it's a separate barrier on its own to the free movement of goods or to enabling the free movement of goods. And then it's also very impractical to choose just 2 countries from ECOWAS, given that there are 15 member states, to choose the approaches of just 2 countries to trade integration in ECOWAS, because that would help in addressing the issue of eliminating the trade barriers to the free movement of goods. Because even if the trade barriers within 2 countries are identified, addressed, and eliminated, it won't translate to the other 13 member states. So we need uniform rules, uniform legal rules that would be acceptable and applicable to all 15 member states, in order to ensure that all 15 countries are happy to allow goods from other member states to come into their member states without impeding this movement with the tariff and some tariff and non-tariff barriers that have been identified in the research. So I don't know if that sufficiently addresses your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation as well.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We have 2 questions, I believe. The first one is in the chat. Emilia, if you want to look at this as well, I will read this out for the benefit of everyone, and then I'll come to Mary. Thank you for your patience. So the first one is asked by Abdul Jawad Kaunde. So they are originally from an SADC member state, Malawi, and they wanted to know whether you have considered some challenges faced by EAC and SADC in terms of absence of common values as one challenge among many facing these 2 bodies, and what also would be a solution to these challenges. Further, do you think citizens fully participate in the formation of these bodies and they are thinking of democratic and autocratic orientations in the member states? What I'll do, sorry, just a lot of reading out, so I apologise about that. What I'll do is I'll invite Mary as well to ask the question, and then if you can maybe address them together, given the time that is left. So Mary.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Emilia, for your very wonderful presentation. And I understand the background you're coming from, because I'm Nigerian and ECOWAS is actually, the member states are large. But I think what I would suggest is to sort of identify leading countries like Nigeria, Ghana, in terms of like migration of product and migration of goods, because within ECOWAS, there are still countries that are able to, push the trade agenda better. And so you may just want to give a succinct summary of the other countries, but focus on major countries who are, who can push trade agendas. Another thing I would suggest that you might propose is the language barrier, because again, in ECOWAS, there is a Francophone part, there is the Anglophone part, and there is the third part of it. So maybe adopting a uniform language can be essential, in pushing trade within ECOWAS, because again, you find out from, research that to export or trade within Africa to other part of the world is easier than trading within ECOWAS itself. So maybe adopting a uniform language, moving away from the colonial past and creating a new part essentially, or a new part originally can help, in mitigating some of the circumstances. And so we may just want to focus on maybe one major issue like language or trade or legal system, but giving the background, just to sort of help, to help the readers understand where you're coming from and where you're going to. That will be my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Emilia. We've got a couple of minutes left, but obviously, if you wish to respond, you're very welcome to.
Yes, so thank you, Mary. I'll just respond to Mary's contribution. While the language barrier is a major barrier to trade in ECOWAS, I think a language barrier is another research topic on its own, because a language barrier is not necessarily considered as a trade. Well, it doesn't come under the tariff or non-tariff barriers. It can come under other barriers to trade, but if the tariff barriers, most importantly, are addressed, then we can look at addressing the language barrier. And because there are 3 common languages which are recognized within ECOWAS, which is the English language, French, and Portuguese, trading with these languages with interpreters shouldn't necessarily constitute a barrier to trade and trade integration, especially if the legal and regulatory framework governing trade are addressed, if they are tightened to address the what I'll consider to be the most important barriers, which are the tariff barriers and some non-tariff barriers. So I think that would be another research topic on its own. If I incorporate it into my research, then it would further complicate things. So that's my response to Mary's contribution, but thank you very much all the same. And I'll just quickly address the question on whether I have considered the challenges in the EAC and in SADC. While I acknowledge that there are challenges in the EAC and SADC, especially with respect to the lack of a common heritage, the focal point of the research is not on the EAC and SADC. The EAC and SADC only come in with respect to the legal framework that they have adopted in addressing some of their trade barriers and in further advancing trade integration in their regional communities. So the focal point is on ECOWAS. So it'll be impractical to look at all-encompassing all the challenges that are inherent in both the EAC and all the challenges that are inherent in SADC, because I'm just looking to extract the laws or the provisions that these countries have adopted to address trade integration, or these communities rather have adopted to address trade integration in their respective communities, and how ECOWAS can either model those provisions or come up with fresh provisions.
Thank you very much. I am aware that we are slightly over time, and there's a lot of comments in the chat if anyone wants to have a look at those.
Tom, just to, sorry for the interruption, just wanted to add, this recording is going to go to the official website, WordPress website, the Global South Network, globalsouthnetwork.com. If you have any objection, please type in the chat box, or you can drop an email. Tom, please continue.
No, thank you very much. It's a very good point. So if people do want to have a look at the chat, if there are any, because I know a lot of people have made suggestions as to possible future directions for research, Emilia, you're very welcome to do so. It really leaves me to thank you for the fascinating presentation, for our peer commentator and discussant as well, for taking the time to add very, very well thought out and considered comments. To Norman and all the work that he has done in the Global South Network. Next week, at 2 p.m. on the 8th of November, we have Bernardo Carvalho de Mayo, who is a PhD candidate at the School of Law, Newcastle University, presenting a project on international human rights, a novel taxonomy of discrimination, a tool to tackle the intersection of multiple factors of discrimination against marginalised individuals and groups.